I'd love to hear your story in terms of, was there a certain film that made you want to be a writer, your choice in your college major?
Yeah, when I was in high school, the film The World According to Garp had a big impact on me. It was about a writer whose mother was a nonfiction writer, and my mother was also a kind of aspiring nonfiction writer. Very different from that character, but still, that movie was the first movie that I was like, there's something that I related to in that movie that was different from any other movie I'd ever seen. It made me think about, somebody wrote that, which was a phrase the Writers Guild used in an ad campaign once to get respect for writers. Somebody wrote that. They had all these lines of dialogue on billboards, don't forget a writer wrote that. An actor didn't just come up with that on the set. But anyway, The World According to Garp had an impact, and I think when I went to college, I knew I wanted to pursue something creative that involved writing, whether it was fiction or screenwriting or maybe even music. And so after a year or two, I settled in on becoming a film major and maybe trying to become like a writer-director, because a lot of my favorite movies at that time were writer-director movies, like Woody Allen movies of that era, like late 70s, early 80s. So I pursued being a film major in my undergraduate in Ohio, which is my home state, and got a 4-year degree, BFA in motion picture production, which of course guarantees you a job in the industry immediately when you show up with that. And then I decided I was going to move to Los Angeles and become an assistant, because I kind of knew, that whole start in the William Morris mailroom kind of thing, that I knew that was a thing you could do. There were people that had moved out to LA from Dayton, Ohio, where I was from, before me, who'd gone to my film school before me, who had these kind of jobs working as assistants at the studios and stuff. So I decided that's going to be my path. I'm going to get it. My day job will be one of those kind of jobs where I'll be like a secretary, and I'll just be writing on the side. And so that's what I pursued, and was lucky enough to get into the Fox Studios kind of in-house temp pool, where somebody in the human resources department had all these temps that every day they would assign to these different jobs throughout the studio, where they needed somebody to fill in for a day or a week or a month or whatever, because some assistant was on maternity leave or out sick or had just left and they hadn't replaced them yet. So I got my taste of all these different kinds of jobs throughout 20th Century Fox and the Fox network, everything from like legal department to accounting and finance, like very corporate departments, but also some of eventually the more creative side, where you're working on a TV show or working for a production company, which is of course what you really want if you're an aspiring writer. And so I did that for a number of years, and eventually got assigned to Tom Hanks's production company just as a temp, which turned into a full-time assistant job working there, where it was basically him and his main assistant, who went with him on location and had been with him for years, and me. I was like the guy in the office, like answering the phone and opening the mail. He was off shooting Forrest Gump for like 5 months at one point, on the East Coast, and I was the only one there in the office kind of holding down the fort, so to speak, at his little production company that was based at Fox at that time. So while I was doing that, I was writing scripts on the side. And I had worked as a writer's assistant on the show Picket Fences right before I worked for Tom Hanks, and got to know other people at my level, other assistants, which is a really helpful thing to do. They say, do you have to move to Los Angeles to be a screenwriter? You don't have to. It helps. But one of the main reasons it can help is if you're the kind of person that gets a job in the business like that, where you're around people doing what you want to be doing, and you meet people at your level who are also trying to do the kinds of things you want to do, and you can sort of help each other. And that certainly worked out for me, because I switched from writing features on spec to, I took a class at UCLA Extension's writers program, where I have taught now in recent years myself on sitcom writing. I started writing a spec script for the show Frasier in that class. And then when it was done, I showed it to this friend I'd worked with on Picket Fences, who was a fellow assistant, but also an aspiring writer who had just gotten an agent. And she liked the Frasier and was willing to show it to her agent. And the agent liked the Frasier enough to want to sign me. So I got this agent while I was still working as an assistant for Tom Hanks, and this agent functioned kind of like managers do now. Managers weren't such a thing back then, where she was giving me notes. She signed me off it, but then she immediately wanted me to rewrite it with all these notes she gave me before she would send it to anyone. And so then she had me, after that was done, she had me start my next one, which was a Mad About You, and then after that a Friends. So I was like pumping out these sitcom spec scripts, because in those days when you wanted to work on staff on a show in the 90s, they more valued specs of existing shows, whereas nowadays it's original pilots that writers tend to use for writing samples to get into TV writing. A staff job like that, which is normally how you get in, is you get hired as like a staff writer on a show if you're one of the lucky few, fortunate few. So that's the direction I was headed, but I still had the Tom Hanks really great sort of assistant day job. But I was really starting to think, eventually I'm going to be a professional writer now. I have an agent, she's sending my stuff out, I got some meetings here and there, but then things took a funny turn, an amazing turn, which is one day Tom Hanks read one or two of those scripts because his assistant, who I worked kind of under, I think recommended, oh, you should have Tom read your, it'd be fun, whatever. I don't know. I was never going to ask him to read my stuff or help me in any way, because I knew this is my job. He's not there to help me do that. And he apparently liked the one or two scripts he read and decided that I had talent, and he told me my talents were being wasted, and he offered me this like amazing, life-changing promotion the week of my 30th birthday. I had a wife and a kid, and she was a teacher, and I was making $700 a week, I think, or something like that. So it was a really good time to get a promotion where I was going to help him, basically help him develop this miniseries he had sold to HBO as an executive producer, which was From the Earth to the Moon, which was about the Apollo space program. He had done the movie Apollo 13 and was a lifelong space junkie, and at this point was the biggest star in Hollywood. He had gotten to that point by then. And so he was able to sell this idea for a miniseries, a very expensive 12-hour miniseries where we would dramatize and recreate the entire Apollo program, right? All these other missions, So I then helped him kind of figure out the sort of outline for that and like find writers to write the episodes, professional screenwriters that were already established, unlike me. But eventually I got to write one of the scripts, and then eventually that script became a decent script because it took a long time, and then I got asked to help rewrite some of the other scripts. So by the end of that production, From the Earth to the Moon, I had kind of been an apprentice producer on the whole thing, so I got a co-producer credit on the whole thing, and I had writing credit or pieces of writing credit on several episodes, and I just like learned all this stuff from just being on it from beginning to end and being able to be kind of in the middle of it, because I worked for Tom and he was the executive producer, so I was on the set and in the editing room and did everything, or watched everything, and so when it won the Emmy for Best Miniseries and all the other big awards, I got to share in those awards because I was one of the producers. So that was really how I got my start. I was very fortunate in that the first thing I wrote professionally not only got produced, which, most things that writers get paid to write still don't get produced, right? You can make a whole career writing things that don't get produced. Not only did it get produced, but I was a producer on it and won these major awards for being that. So it was kind of a fairy tale beginning of a career that I owe to Tom Hanks and to the sitcom writing, which you wouldn't think translates into historical drama about the space program, but I somehow managed to figure out how to write for that series, even though it wasn't the kind of stuff I was doing on my own.